Over on Fox News, they were having a discussion about the Department of Government Efficiency, also known as DOGE, arguing that cutting potentially 75% of the government workforce would be just fine and that most Americans wouldn't even notice the cuts.
There's also a different game-changing environment, Clay.
And remember what Elon did with Twitter. He fired 75% of the employees, and the business actually is more efficient and effective now than it was before. Do any of us doubt that if 75% of federal employees were gone tomorrow in terms of being on the payroll that we all have to pay for, that the government would severely be curtailed in terms of its ability to work? I don't. I think you could knock out 75% of federal workers, and most of us would have no idea.
Well, let's get the obvious out of the way. I'm sure that those workers and their families would sure notice if those jobs were cut, but let's be real, the rest of us would certainly feel it too. The lines of the DMV are already out of control. Also, comparing the government to a social media company is not exactly a direct comparison. To argue that Twitter was worse off than X is today is a little bit silly. Elon Musk has certainly cut down the labor force at the company, but he's also slashed its value and the platform is actively bleeding users. But speaking of government inefficiency, let's not pretend that it's not a problem. In fact, it's sort of the government's thing. The government loves to be inefficient. And personally, inefficiency is a pet peeve of mine. I don't like it. I don't like any kind of waste. I don't like wasted money or time, resources, opportunities, lives, whatever. Anytime normal Americans have to interact with any kind of government structure, whether it is the DMV or the court system or whatever, it's always a bit of a nightmare, isn't it? It always takes way longer than it probably needs to. They operate with ancient technology. Their systems are outdated, and yes, they are inefficient. Does it have to be that way? Well, I don't work in a government office, but I would say no, probably not. I think there are always ways to clean something up if you just put some time and maybe money into it. Maybe that would mean addressing some redundancies, sure, but dumping 75% of a workforce without that same government having some way to address all of the newly unemployed Americans it created, well, typically that's not what presidential administrations want to be remembered for. While there may be a way around that bad press, what if federal workers aren't made redundant and let go? What if they just leave on their own? So by mandating that workers return to offices 5 days a week, which is something that hasn't proven to be better for either the worker or the organization, they're hoping that most people will just quit and find a different work from home opportunity elsewhere.
All we talked about was cutting spending. Elon and Vivek talked about having a naughty list and a nice list for members of Congress and senators and how we vote and how we're spending the American people's money. I think that would be fantastic.
How many federal workers are remote these days?
So, I mean, before we even get into this, I mean, the goal of these two men, though, Jake, is really they hope that when people hear that they're going to put an end to federal or work from home, that many of these federal workers will quit and they'll be able to save money for the federal government. And that's the goal. So how many of these federal workers currently working remote? 1.3 million currently approved for telework. That's about half of the federal workforce. And of the federal workers who are working from home, they're spending the vast majority of their time in the office, 60% according to the Office of Personnel and Management. And then there's this subset of federal workers, about 10%. So that's 228,000. They are purely remote. They do not ever come into the office. But again, small sliver, that's 10% of the workforce. And it's because of this data that the union president of AFGE, the largest union representing these federal workers, put out this statement saying, the implication that federal employees writ large are not working in person is simply not backed up by the data and not in reality.
That way, they don't get the bad press and potentially the stock value hit of having to lay off workers, and they don't have to pay out severance packages. Additionally, if some of the old guard quits, then younger people can be hired to fill those vacant positions if necessary for a lot less money. Efficient indeed, but who is truly benefiting from this? Not the workers who were made to suffer to the point that they left their jobs. Not the workers who can't afford to quit for one reason or another, who now have to pick up the slack for the diminished workforce. Just the few people at the top implementing these initiatives are coming out of this better than they went in. They're able to maintain or even increase shareholder value while keeping a larger share of the profits for themselves. Reporting from the Hill had this to say: Bamboo HR's findings show that about 1/4 of vice presidents and C-suite executives implemented return to office policies in hopes of prompting voluntary resignations. Similarly, around 20% of HR professionals indicated that their in-office policies were designed to make workers quit. Bamboo HR's report suggests that these mandates are essentially layoffs in disguise, aiming to reduce headcount without the costs associated with formal layoffs. So many Trump voters, at least the first time he won the presidency in 2016, voted for him specifically because he was a businessman. He was going to run the country like a business because business people know how to ask the right questions, how to make the hard decisions, and how to enact meaningful change throughout the organization. However, the reality is that business in this country is often corrupt and driven by greed masquerading as efficiency. If this is the kind of behavior you want to see in your government, then good for you, I guess. You're going to get what you wanted. But don't be surprised when those cost-saving measures don't trickle down to you. Besides, the make people miserable until they quit strategy didn't go the way many of these companies had hoped it would. According to Unispace's research, 42% of companies with enforced return-to-office mandates experienced higher employee attrition than expected. This significant attrition rate points to a critical miscalculation by employers who underestimated the attachment employees have to the flexible work arrangements established during the pandemic. Thus, even where bosses expect attrition, the data shows they get substantially more attrition than they wanted. As a result, 29% of these companies are now facing substantial recruitment challenges as the scale of resignations created serious operational and staffing problems. This misalignment between expectation and reality has left many companies struggling to fill the gaps left by departing employees. This is like when you cheat on your partner because you would rather them break up with you than you having to do it. It's cowardice and manipulation, and this type of behavior is typically not acceptable when you encounter it in other areas of life. Still, people will defend Musk and Ramaswamy and the Department of Government Efficiency the same way they defend corporations and their inhumane methods of conducting business. Because that's just it. It's business. It's not personal. That's what they keep saying. But anyone who knows anything about business knows that business is little else but personal. All right, that's it for me. If you got anything out of this, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more. Thanks.